And now it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Hughes, Director at the Environmental Finance Center at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill.
Thank you very much, Laura. I'm glad to be here with everyone. As Laura said, we have a great participation for this webinar, and hopefully we'll have some opportunities for people to share some of their experiences during the webinar. Just a few words of introduction. I'm the director of the UNC Environmental Finance Center, which is part of the UNC School of Government at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And through that role, we work with communities across the country on projects related to how they finance environmental programs and services. And certainly water partnerships is one of those initiatives and strategies that fits into that umbrella. I'm also a faculty member at the UNC School of Government, and I teach and do research on this topic. And it's a topic near and dear to my heart just because it's such an interesting public administration topic, and it has the potential for such a large environmental impact. And finally, I'll just add, for those of you on the call that are small water system utility directors, prior to joining the university, I was a small water system utility director myself, and it's been a while since I've been in your shoes, but some of what I'm going to talk to you today is coming directly from firsthand experience. As Laura mentioned, this webinar is part of a larger project that we've entitled the Smart Management for Small Water Systems Program. It's an EPA-funded program that offers technical assistance, workshops, e-learning, online tools to small systems across the country, specifically in the area of water finance and management. So a lot of what we do for this overall program relates to trying to build the capacity of small water systems across the country. We have trainings and activities related to a variety of activities and areas. This slide just shows some of what we have been involved in, and I will add that this program, as of now, will be going on for at least another year and a half. So there will be opportunities for you, if you're interested in these types of areas, to participate in future training events and webinars. The program is implemented by the Environmental Finance Center Network, one of which is one of the network members, which is the University of North Carolina Environmental Finance Center. But I do want to stress that we are a network of university-based finance centers from across the country, and I know we have good geographic representation on this webinar, and I hope for those of you that might not be familiar with the Environmental Finance Center in your region, I hope this might be an opportunity for you to reach out to them. Many of them offer services well beyond the small water system project that we're talking about today, so areas of everything from solid waste management to land conservation and other areas. Today's agenda is going to focus on this broad idea of water utility partnerships. We'll talk a little bit about why bother partnering, what's in it for you, so to speak. We'll talk a little bit about types of partnerships, but most of the workshop, most of the webinar is going to focus on some of the barriers that we've encountered in our work with encouraging partnerships, and then some of the strategies and tips for overcoming those barriers. And we'll end the webinar with some time for questions and comments from the audience. As I've said a few times, we have good representation for participants. We're been very happy with these webinars that we've been able to attract participants from across the country, have been able to share a wide range of views and challenges. This map just shows where folks are calling in from today. Again, pretty diverse crowd on the phone. So again, thank you very much for spending your Friday afternoon with us, or in some cases your early Friday morning, depending on where you're calling in from. We know where you're from, but we don't know what size utility you are. So I'd like to encourage everyone now to just take a second and answer a poll question so we have an idea of who's on our webinar audience today. And just how many people, not accounts, but people, does your utility serve if you're a utility? And just give people a second to answer this poll, and we'll go ahead and broadcast the results. Also a way to get people to exercise their exercise during the webinar. Okay, Laura, I think you can go ahead and push out the results. We've had most people voting. Okay, it looks like not only a good geographic diversity on the call today, but also a real nice diversity in size of water system. So with some probably rather large systems on the call, but also quite a few, 16% of you that are under 500. So as what we're talking about today, we'll try to cover things that will be appropriate for both the very small utilities, homeowner associations, et cetera, as well as some of the larger, maybe local government-owned utilities that are on the call. We could spend a lot more than an hour talking about water partnerships. There are many, many types of water partnerships that utilities have been involved in. This slide just shows just a subset of some of the examples of water partnerships that we've worked in over the years. In some cases, a partnership is a handshake agreement between two utility managers to help each other out during hard times. We see more formalized partnerships around specific service areas, and I'm going to highlight a few examples of these later on, but it might be two utilities share meter reading crews, or they have a purchasing agreement. Emergency mutual aid agreements are very common. These are the kind of partnerships that really only come into play when there is an emergency. So we're not going to talk too much about those types of partnerships today, but there's a whole set of examples and kind of models for those types of agreements that are interesting. Where we're going to spend a lot of our time today is talking about these next few types of partnerships, a little bit more formalized than the informal handshake agreements, bulk and wholesale water sales agreements. For many of you on the phone, I imagine, many of you on the webinar, I imagine a very key aspect of your utility provision, your utility model. We see a lot of small utilities that buy water from another utility and resell it. So we'll talk quite a bit about those types of partnerships today. Management contracts in which one utility may manage a part, or in some cases an entire set of services for another utility. And then these last few, you may not even refer to these as partnerships. These are much more elaborate regionalization opportunities where water utilities will join together and create new authorities. Or in some cases, they will decide to get out of the business altogether, and they are mostly concerned about what needs to occur when they are handing over their assets to another utility. Those latter type of water partnerships, we certainly work quite a bit with, but those are very specialized, and we're not going to spend that much time on this webinar with those types. But certainly, if there's comments or questions about those, we can address them at the end. I know the amount of experience that we have listening in on this webinar is incredible, and I would ask folks to feel free and actually be encouraged to share some of your experience with us and the rest of the participants. So what I'd ask is to use the question function of the webinar software, where you can actually type in a question for us. But for now, if some of you are coming off of negotiations with another utility, or you feel like you've successfully created a water partnership in the last few years, we'd love to hear a few sentences of your advice that you would give to your peers in this area, or if it maybe didn't work out well for you and it worked out poorly, and you just want to vent a little bit and give us some of your ideas related to why you think it didn't work. So again, ask people to go ahead and share some of your collective wisdom with the group. And what we'll do is throughout the webinar, we will, if we get some suggestions, we'll go ahead and read some of those and refer to those during the webinar. So if you want to have your name read over air, just go ahead and sign the question. Otherwise, we'll just mention you anonymously. So again, please feel free to share your experience with us. I will say this from my personal experience in the utility business, that working on partnerships can be very challenging. You have to have some type of incentive or benefit to a partnership, particularly a fairly complicated one that requires a lot of staff time, a lot of different stakeholders negotiating. So you have to clearly have some reason for doing it. In our work, we have seen very significant benefits of partnerships across the country. There's a lot of subtle benefits of partnerships, some very specific benefits in specific situations, but the broad benefits that we see most common relate to the core idea of better service for your customers and a reduced financial impact on customers. So put another way, we see many examples where if 2, 3, 4, 10 utilities work together, their customers get better quality water, safer water, and they pay less for it. So that's really why we're here this afternoon, to explore these types of benefits. Some of the benefits that we see that there's lots of evidence that this is possible, and it may very well be possible for many of you, is to reduce costs through increased economies of scale. So when you have 2 or 3 utilities working together, spreading their costs over a larger customer base, we see the overall cost and the cost per customer go down. Lots of examples of that. Access to capital, in many cases, particularly for those of you that are under 500, serve under 500 people, frankly, it's very difficult to get people to lend you money, people to give you money on grants. So getting access to capital has been a huge benefit that we've seen throughout the country. And lastly, it's this idea of being able to pool experience. A lot of these partnerships are designed to be able to have smaller systems access the type of highly skilled workforce that can cost more, can require harder to recruit those types of staff. So really what we're looking at is a way to allow some of the small systems to tap into that operational expertise, whether it's a skilled operator or whether it's a skilled manager. And we see lots of examples of utilities joining together and being able to access better skilled staff through partnerships. One thing that may be the case for some of you, or you may have been involved with, is for a certain amount of utilities out there, I would say water partnerships, not to be melodramatic, but it's their last and only option. We have seen a number of utilities over the last few years where they basically got in over their head, and we can't figure out a way to make them a viable financial system without a partnership. We see, and this is what you're seeing now, is just a cut from one of our recent blog postings related to financial myths of small water systems. We've seen a lot of small water systems build new facilities and not be able to attract the customers they need for those facilities. We've seen across the country trends of declining sales that have put many small water systems in serious financial difficulties, to the point where some are having difficulty paying back loans, they're having difficulty keeping their rates within some sort of manageable level. So whatever your incentives for doing these partnerships, I think there's plenty of evidence that they are real, and they are something that should be considered in any type of management strategy. I'd like to go ahead and ask another poll question now related to people's experience with partnerships on the webinar. Could you answer what best describes your situation? And you'll see, this is not, I'm sure some of you might be tempted to answer a few of these, but just pick the ones that best describes your situation. Are you highly dependent on the services of another utility? Do you buy water from another utility? Do you basically need another utility to stay in business? Do you provide essential services to other utilities? Or is it much more symbiotic, where you are providing support to other utilities and other utilities support you? Or are you really independent and you don't see yourself changing? Or are you independent now but are feeling like, for the reasons, maybe possibly some of the reasons I outlined, that may change in the future? So we're seeing folks voting. Let's kind of give it another few seconds, and we'll push out the results of this. Okay. Okay, Laura, I think you can go ahead and push out the results. Again, as everyone will hopefully see on their screen, none of you should feel alone based on how you classify yourself in partnerships. And this is not surprising based on our past work. A full 25% of you, 24% of you are independent, and you're not, you don't think that you really enter into any of these partnerships, which may be fine in your circumstances. But the rest of you, full 75% of you are either currently relying on a partnership in a fairly substantial way, and a full 12% of you, over 10% of you, are looking at increased partnerships. So hopefully we'll address, for those of you looking at increased partnerships, we'll provide you some tips, and for those of you in existing partnerships, we'll provide some ideas for you to potentially strengthen those partnerships. Another slightly different question about partnerships, and this starts to get at our ideas of how you actually get into these and maintain these partnerships. If you're a utility, how important is it for you to maintain control in the future? And I know that's a broad question, but just what's your gut feeling of answering that question? And just judging by how fast people are voting, this seems to be a question that people don't have much trouble answering, that you kind of know where you stand in this spectrum. So I'm going to give a few more people voting. Okay, I think we're slowing down. Laura, I think you can go ahead and push out the poll so everybody can kind of see. So right now, I think we just answered one of the goals and objectives of this webinar is, what is a challenge or a barrier to partnership? And I think everybody's staring at it right now at their computer screen, and that is water utility management for many local governments, for many utilities, is an incredibly important activity. It's something that utility managers are quite proud of, and it's not surprising when you have something that's so important, that's so interrelated to a community's well-being, that there is a sense of wanting to maintain control. So you'll see a full, almost 2/3 of you, 61%, said that maintaining control is really essential moving forward. Now, when you look at how many people answered that question versus the number of people in partnerships or thinking that they're going to get into increased partnerships, you can obviously see that we're going to have to deal with control whenever we design partnerships. Really only 6% of you said that control is not that much of an issue, so that if, for those of you, if something better came along and you had to forego control, you'd be probably more likely to do it. What we find in our work is, in a lot of cases, tapping into some of those benefits that we talked about a few minutes ago require giving a little bit in this control issue. And that for many, requires a fair degree of trust and some pretty solid agreements. You'll see that you track pretty well. This is a very common survey that we ask when we do these types of trainings, and this is just one we did from in North Carolina a few years ago. We did add for this one the question, happy to be rid of the thing, and we didn't ask you. Nobody said that they would be happy to be rid of it in this group, but you can see that in North Carolina we have some people that would love to get out of the utility business altogether. Again, this control issue is essential. These are some of the other common concerns, a lot of which I think relate to the issues of control. The desire for autonomy perfectly matches, I think, with this kind of concern for control. Keeping options open, particularly for some of the longer-term contracts that we see being a prerequisite for a partnership. Many utilities are very reluctant to do something that will last 15, 20 years and maybe shut a door on a particular water resource option. Could be where you're getting your water, could be how you staff your water treatment plant. Just concerns about keeping options open. This next one, this third one, from someone who does a fair amount of financial analysis and economic analysis, has been the most fascinating. And I can't underline this enough, this unequal sharing of benefits. What I mean by this is we have seen some excellent partnership opportunities fall apart, not because it was a win-lose situation, but because it was a win and win more situation. These agreements, particularly in areas where folks might not be trusting of their neighbors, if there's a water partnership where someone perceives someone gaining more than they do, even if they would gain as well, they might not enter into it. So again, it's a fascinating challenge. It's a hard one to deal with because often in these partnerships, the way you design them, somebody may benefit more than someone else. So just something to be aware of. Mistrust, certainly for some of you, again, working almost 20 years in the local government sector, we realize that not everybody trusts their neighbors as maybe we would like to see in an ideal world. These last ones, where it just takes too much effort with the partnership. Again, it's easy for me, frankly, in my role now, working at a university, to say you should all go out and partnership, and go all out and look for partners. It's a lot harder when it requires the hours of negotiation and analysis and giving up control. So I think we all have to be aware of this. There are certainly other concerns with partnerships. I'll try again to get some of you to throw us your wisdom. Not a lot of people I see are answering my first question about tips for partnerships, but how about concerns with partnerships? If any of you have a concern with a partnership in your area, go ahead and just type it in now, and then again we'll refer to that. So here's one that just came in. It's the unknown future, and that's a little bit of referral to the kind of keeping options open idea. Is that it's difficult to sign a 10-year contract when you're not sure what regulation is going to happen in 5 years, or whether you're going to grow faster than your neighboring community. So thank you for the person that threw that out. Anybody else that wants to offer up a challenge for partnerships? Well, again, feel free to exercise your fingers, and we'll get to those later if you have any other ideas. I now want to just give you some examples. I don't want to seem to stack the deck against partnerships. In fact, we see lots of very exciting partnerships out there, and we see more coming in every day. So here's a few examples of that category of targeted partnerships. You're not giving over control to anybody else. In this particular case, it's a very simple partnership, but it's a fascinating one, and it has great economic benefits. A group organized in the Northeast Merrimack Valley has put together 35 small community water systems in a purchasing compact for chemicals. And you can see on the slide now, this is just an example of their cooperative bid. In order to be part of this partnership, you basically agree with your neighbors that you are going to purchase all your supplies and chemicals together, and you agree that you're not going to seek vendors independently. You know, this is one of the classic ways of tapping into the power of pooling. Getting multiple people to purchase. Certainly, if you are a system of 500 or less, you are going to have a hard time to get a supplier of chemicals to give you the best deal. But if you are grouped together with 35, you may find yourself paying a whole lot less for those chemicals. Here's another model just to kind of highlight laboratory services. We came across this model a few years ago with 100 systems in Ohio have organized, and they partnered in this case with the for-profit sector to purchase lab services in bulk on behalf of all 100 systems. And you can just track the lower costs that these systems have encountered by doing this partnership. Here's one that gets in a little bit more elaborate of actually sharing staff, and this is 2 communities in Iowa. A small system had a hard time retaining operators, and they were able to sign an MOU with each other. And now Des Moines, a large utility, is able to provide some shared expertise to the smaller utility. A win-win situation. The larger utility gets some extra revenue to offset some of their costs, and the smaller utility gets access to operators that they would have had a hard time recruiting on their own. We see a lot of partnerships forming these days related to billing, utilities sharing meter reading, sharing billing software. This is just a basic example of a utility sharing meter reading with other utilities within their local government. Here's an example that's a little bit more sophisticated, and we're slowly going to get into the kind of partnerships that require more work, that require giving up some more control. In this particular situation, we had a small HOA serving 82 homes fully transfer their water system to a private company. Again, a pretty sophisticated partnership in terms of having an agreement that deals with asset transfer, having some clauses in the agreement, having some understanding of what that transfer and asset is going to mean from a cost standpoint. But as this slide shows, one thing we know for sure in this transfer is that that it's going to be very difficult for a small system to get the kind of access that a large system would get in terms of operators. So suddenly this small HOA that might have had one part-time operator now has access to most likely some of the most trained operators in the state of Connecticut. This is an example of a partnership that we've been involved in a little bit in North Carolina. I thought that this quote was particularly telling. This is a transfer of assets from a small town to a county system in North Carolina. This is the quote that the town manager made to his city council, that the county has the resources to operate the system and is in a better position to apply for the funding necessary to upgrade the system. And I have firsthand experience with this situation, and yes, this small town had to give up a fair amount of control, but what they gained in terms of the ability to fund their resources and their assets is enormous. So we are starting to see more and more of these challenges. And again, here's one just to show you that some of these partnerships are very, very extensive, and in this case we saw 12 small utilities forming into one new entity. So again, just a few snapshots of examples. What we're going to spend the bulk of the rest of the webinar are on this middle ground of agreements. This is the kind of partnership where you are signing an agreement with another utility to sell water, to buy water, to manage an asset. And we've done a lot of work in this area, and we, quite frankly, have seen a lot of these agreements that were very well set up and were providing benefits benefits to each of their participants. But really, we've also seen many of these inter-utility agreements that were set up in a way that we didn't have a win-win situation. We had a win-lose situation, or we had a lose-lose situation, or we had a huge controversy spring up 2 or 3 years after the agreement. So I want to talk a little bit about the core strategies that we've seen work in making these agreements survive. If you look at the slide now, these are the things I'm going to talk about briefly, and I'm going to give you some resources in a few moments to talk that describe some of the other strategies for making these types of partnerships work. I'm going to talk a little bit about service area, water quality, current and future capital costs, and then commodity cost adjustments. Just very specific nature of partnerships. And for some of you, this will seem very familiar, and some of you, some of these topics may not be that appropriate. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is pulled off of a resource document that we have been using for the last 5 or 6 years, and you can see it here, the link. It's available at on our website at efc.sog.unc.edu. It is a series of tips designing interlocal agreements that has been informed by our work directly with small utilities, and we have examples of text from agreements. We have specific advice, yes, no, do not do, ideas for utilities that are considering a range of different issues. One of the things, and this document I just mentioned starts out with this idea that particularly for those of you that are concerned about control, we find that any type of advanced partnership has to have a frank discussion about who serves which customers where now and in the future. If you do have an agreement to sell water to your neighbor, I would highly advise having a map attached to that agreement so that your neighbor doesn't get in a position of trying to sell water to people that you had counted on selling water to directly. We see lots and lots of disagreements related to who is supposed to serve what particular area. If you don't have any discussion of service area in an agreement that does share water and does involve lines moving out into potentially unserved areas, I think you're very, very likely to have problems moving into the future. Capital costs are a big part of many partnerships, and capital comes up in many ways. We see 2 or 3 small utilities going in together and building a new treatment facility. We see one utility signing an agreement to purchase water from another utility, and they have a clause that if they ever have to make capital investments in that seller's facility, the purchaser will agree to cover some of the costs. So we urge folks to ask this question with any type of agreement that relates to capital costs. How does the agreement assure that the water suppliers receive adequate payment for the use of their capital, both for new and future investments? How precise is the language? This last question has been the question that has stumped many, many communities across the country, and it's the question of, if you have 2, 3, 5, 6 partnerships, and you're using a facility that has unused capacity, who is responsible for paying for that unused capacity? That may seem like kind of a difficult or basic question, depending on your perspective. It's been a question that has sent many utilities that we've worked with to court, frankly, arguing over who's responsible for paying for some aspect of capital. There isn't one right way of dealing with capital, at least in our experience. We see some agreements where capital costs are rolled into the price of water with a minimum purchase clause. That minimum purchase clause is an essential part of the agreement because it allows the seller to be sure that they're going to get a certain amount of revenue on an annual basis. I know some purchasers don't like those minimum purchase clauses. I will say that for those agreements where there isn't a minimum purchase and the purchaser has wanted to keep all options open and they have decided 2 years into the contract that they're going to stop buying water from their seller, we have seen lots of problems because the seller might have made improvements to their facilities assuming a certain purchase amount. So really we actually like the minimum purchase clause in our agreements. We think it works both well for the seller and the purchaser. But there are other approaches. We see upfront capacity fees. These are ideas where someone might agree to pay $1,000, $500,000, $1 million to buy into another utility's capacity, just to make sure that some of the hardcore capital costs of a facility are covered. We've seen recurring capacity fees on an annual basis where someone might pay a flat fee to cover capacity capital costs and then another fee to cover the volumetric charge. This fourth example, we've seen many old agreements that have a clause that says a purchaser assumes a percentage of the seller's debt service, or we might see language where the 2 parties agree to, quote, share future capital investment costs. That imprecise language has been a real source of headaches down the line. Right now, we are aware of several utilities that are in court because of disagreements over what it means to assume a percentage of somebody's debt service or a percentage of someone's capital costs. A lot of the problem has been we are seeing far less water sold, particularly in rural areas across the country, than was predicted 10 years ago. So we are seeing a number of partnerships where people are struggling with not selling that much water and having facilities that have lots of excess capacity, and everybody's pointing the finger at each other, trying to get someone to come to the rescue to pay for debt service for a plant expansion that in the end might not have even been needed. So again, these are real issues that could have at least been partially addressed by some more precise language at the outset, thinking through how capital costs would be shared. For many, it all comes down to the price of water. How much do you pay if you buy water from your neighbor per 1,000 gallons of water? How much do you pay today, and how much are you going to pay in the future? We had a couple folks, and thanks again, people are starting to respond by giving some tips and giving some examples of things to avoid. In just looking through this list, I am seeing a few things that relate to this idea, again, of lack of knowledge of the future is what scares people, not understanding kind of what the cost might look like in the future. I know this has come up quite a bit in relation to pricing. Are you going to put yourself exposed to the pricing whims of a neighboring utility? Many utilities are very reluctant about retiring an old, worn-out set of groundwater wells in favor of connecting to their neighboring large utility that has a brand new surface water treatment plant that's producing high-quality water, because they don't know how much that water utility is going to charge in 5 or 10 years for the water that they buy. We've seen a number of different approaches. I think the worst approach is to sign an agreement today, particularly a 5, 10, 40-year agreement. We have seen 40-year agreements that don't mention how the price of water between two partners is going to change with time, believe it or not. That is a bad approach. You want to have pretty precise language about how the prices, the fees that you pay in a partnership are going to evolve over time. One common way that we see is that a utility might link their price increases to the consumer price index or some type of other construction index. This has worked well for some people. Particularly where inflation has been very low, but the cost of construction has been increasing pretty rapidly, this has not necessarily worked that well for them. But at least it's better than not mentioning any type of adjustment approach. The cost accounting approach makes sense theoretically, that you will just look at costs on a routine basis, and you will allocate those costs to your partners. Or if you are relying on another utility, you basically trust them to run the numbers and tell you what you have to pay this year versus next year versus the year after. While that might sound good, we've seen a lot of disagreements over cost accounting. What percentage of cost should we pay? What percentage of staff labor should we pay? So it's something to be aware of. One approach that we actually see a lot in small systems, which I think tends to work pretty well, is where a small system that may be buying water from a larger neighboring system, the neighboring system agrees that they will never raise rates faster than what they raise the rate to their own customers. That's worked pretty well for some folks. It gives the idea that a utility won't try to recover more revenue from their purchase utilities than they do from their own direct customers. So we have seen that as well. We've seen costs go up, and they don't go up for the large utility, but they all get passed over to the smaller utilities that are buying bulk water. So we do like the link to the retail rate. I will add that particularly in the Southeast and the rural Southeast, we've seen a lot of these contracts. We have seen the retail rate of water grow very rapidly, and we now see that in some cases water purchase systems are paying $10, $12, $15 for raw treated water before they even move it through their water lines. So that last approach can result in some pretty high rates if you're not careful. And again, I know I'm covering a lot of information in this webinar. All of what I'm covering is in a lot more detail in that document. For those of you that want examples of the text in these different approaches, it's right in that document I referred to. There are some other things that really just fit into common sense, and most of this is what utilities have told us over the years, and I see some of you telling us right now to do some of these things. What does the agreement say about transferring, for example, conservation? We have, and certainly for those of you on the West Coast, you know that you have some pretty strict conservation, in some cases legal requirements. You don't want to be in a situation where you are a small utility buying water from a large utility, and the large utility has mandatory conservation, and the small utility, it's not clear whether they need mandatory conservation or whether they can go on as business as usual. We had one situation in North Carolina a few years ago where the large utility was shutting down all the car washes. The neighboring utility that was buying water from the large utility refused to have any conservation measures for their customers. So you had this very tense situation where all the people from the city were driving out to the rural areas to have their car washed, even though it was water that was being treated by the urban water utility. So something to be aware of. This second one is somewhat complicated, but we urge folks, particularly small systems that are considering retiring a well system, where in the past they might have produced their own water and they are considering purchasing water from a surface water treatment plant or a large neighboring utility. What's going to happen in your agreement if you have the small utility have a major fire in your service area and you pump out lots of water over a 24-hour period, or you end up with a huge water line leak, or you just end up with lots of water leaks? Is there any clause in the agreement for you to get relief from your seller? We have some utilities, one utility in particular that we worked with on the wastewater side. They did not factor in inflow and infiltration into the negotiation of their wastewater agreement. They retired the small utility, retired their wastewater treatment plant, hooked on to the neighboring utility. The first rainstorm, the small utility sent about 100% extra of their normal load to the large utility, and they had to pay for every gallon of that rainwater that was treated. They quickly ran into financial troubles, and that some of that stress continues today. So there are these very specific things to consider. And then certainly you always want to think about emergency situations. I'm going to take a breath. I know for those of you, you know, this was a lot of information. I'd like to now turn the webinar over, and we have a fair bit of time where folks can ask questions related to any of the strategies I mentioned up until now, and I'm also going to go ahead and read from some of what people sent in related to their own recommendations. So now take a moment, think about some of what I've said. If you have a very specific question about any of those strategies, particularly if you don't agree with them, we'd love to hear your opinion. And I will say right now, here are some of what you've been typing in during the workshop. We had one utility that said that the seller often expects compensation for assets that are beyond the value of the system. You know, and that is something that we come across a lot, is how do you value assets of a water system, either from a seller's perspective or a purchaser's perspective. And there's a lot written on that and a lot of disagreement about what's the value. If two small systems are merging and one of the water system is going to retire their water treatment plant, trying to figure out the value of a retired water treatment plant can be very tricky. We had one participant say that before you do any type of partnership, go ahead and take your elected officials and your operators to go visit the facilities of your potential partner. And I think that's a great, that's just a great idea of being in a situation where you start to actually see with your own eyes the, maybe the quality of the operators or the quality of the facilities. Certainly, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and there are some water assets, just looking at them give you confidence, and unfortunately the reverse is true for many water assets across the country. There's somebody had a very specific example that I thought was interesting, that at least in one state, in this case Wisconsin, they thought very clearly about how to have adjustment clauses in their agreements, and you can actually, as a utility, tap into this idea of having this standard water adjustment clause. And there's a website that we will, I should have mentioned, some of these resources that you all offer, we will document and push out attached to the materials for this website. So there is a website for the Wisconsin model for what that water adjustment clause would look like that we will try to send out. Here's some just straight questions that I'll go ahead and answer. The question is, do you have any advice for things to consider when 5 small villages are planning to form a separate water entity? The entity plans to take over one of the treatment plants and then run regional lines out to the other villages. What is the fair way to value the treatment plant? And I started to talk a little bit about the valuation in a second. I think for this situation, it is going to require everybody to kind of think in creative ways about the value of assets. This idea of one utility gets to keep their treatment plant, and then maybe some of these other utilities are forfeiting or mothballing their facilities. We have seen ways of valuing assets that I wouldn't recommend in this situation. You can look at a book value of an asset. So in this situation, I imagine there will be a depreciated book value of an asset that would be tempting to just have the one small village say our asset is worth this amount of money, you all pay that, and we'll call ourselves partners. That's certainly a viable approach, but I would urge at least the consideration of some other valuation options. One of the valuation analyses we often do is we will take all, in this particular case, all 5 small utilities, and we will look forward 5 or 10 years and look at what their rates would be individually if they did not partner. And usually you can see that in this particular case, maybe the larger village that has the nice water facility is still going to have pretty significant rate increases into the future. By partnering with the smaller utilities, you may be able to see that even the large utility is going to get a lot of customer savings advantages in terms of reduced rates for their customers. You can actually look at what those reduced rates are as a value. So you can say one system is going to benefit by this amount because we are going to be able to charge our customers less, and you can put that on the table as a potential credit for the valuation. Valuation tends to be pretty tricky and get into a lot of accounting, so I would say that would be a candidate for anybody on the call that is interested in. I'm going to give you in a moment an opportunity to fill out a poll to express interest in more advanced assistance from us. This might be an opportunity to kind of have somebody from our team call your community and talk about some valuation options. We had another question that says, have you seen water quality issues addressed? For example, high disinfection byproducts water from a supplier. And the answer is yes. That's been a huge issue as I'm currently in an area of the country, speaking to you from an area from country that has very turbid water. You know, I saw some of you from the pristine Mountain West or from the Northeast that have, you know, this great pristine water. We have murky water in the Southeast, and when you chlorinate murky water and you send it through long distances to smaller utilities, you can end up with some pretty nasty disinfection byproducts that in some cases can put you out of compliance. So we have seen a number of agreements where the small utility that might be buying from a larger utility the large utility in particular will make it clear what they agree to send at the entryway to the smaller utility. In some cases, they will only agree to send in water that has a certain percentage of disinfection byproducts, and then it's up to the smaller system to take it from there. We have seen a few cases where the utility that was selling water was willing to write into their contract the promise to keep water at a higher quality, but that the smaller system might have to pay more for that water. So I think we're getting pretty close to our hour part. I think I've dealt with most of the specific questions that have come up. I want to give people an opportunity to register an interest in some future assistance. Let me just see a few of the other questions to get through. There's only one or two. There was a question about a listing of sample agreements that can be customized. In the document that I mentioned, we have language from a number of agreements that can be cut and customized. So we've been reluctant to put up a model contract because circumstances are so different. But if the person asking that question has a specific thing that they're looking for and they want to email us, be happy to try to give you a couple of our contracts just out of our files. So unless there's any other questions now, I think I'm going to just, if everybody can just hold on just another minute, we just have one or two more requests for you, and then we'll let everybody go on their Friday afternoon. One is that I want to make a plug for our next webinar, which is on a related topic, related in the term that it deals with a financial issue that is important to many of you, but in this particular case it deals with how you pay with energy improvements, and this is a webinar that we have scheduled for next week, and I urge anyone that's interested to go to the EFCN website, efcnetwork.org, and register for this this webinar. And you can see the link right down there, but you can get to all of our webinars for this project by going to the EFCN network. A few final questions. I mentioned our blog in one case. We put out a lot of our information in short blog posts. If you are interested in subscribing to our blog post, it's maybe once a week, occasionally twice a week at the most. Please let us know, and we will enroll you. Just a way to get yourself automatically enrolled. You can also always go to our website and sign up for it in that particular way. So, Laura, you can just go to the next poll. I think we had people fill that one out. This last one, for those of you, particularly the ones that had some pretty complicated questions, if you're interested in us following up with you, we do have, as part of this, the Smart Management for Small Water Systems project, we do have a whole team of professionals that can interface with you either on the phone, online, or in some cases through live visits. So if you are interested, in some sort of follow-up technical assistance related to what we talked about today in partnerships, or frankly, if you have any issue that's related to pricing or asset management, any of those topics that I showed you at the beginning of the webinar, we'd be happy to reach out to you. And again, you can get to us anytime, but right now, if you fill in this poll, we'll be sure to follow up directly so that we can get up with you and talk to you. And then that about does it. I think we're a little bit ahead of time, but I know on a Friday afternoon, I imagine most of you have water crises to help put out, so we'll send you on your way. We would ask that you use a little bit of your extra time this afternoon that we didn't use with the webinar content to please fill out an evaluation that was just shipped out from you in the chat box. We do a lot of these webinars. We're constantly perfecting them. We would just love to hear your comments about what we did right and what we did wrong in this particular webinar, what topics you might like to see for future webinars. The other thing that I'm going to mention is that we do a lot of research in this area, and as a separate project, we are doing a research project now on the way utilities interact with each other. For those of you that want to contribute to the greater good, the greater research good, there's also a link to a voluntary research survey that's a very short research survey about your perceptions about cost. We'd love you to consider participating in that completely voluntary research survey. I think with that, I'm going to wrap it up. I thank everybody for participating with us on this webinar, and we hope everyone has a good weekend.